this is an opportunity to make a step change, like a monumental improvement in how we keep people safe in indoor spaces and benefit humans all over the planet, make us all healthier, more productive, and happier ultimately.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, folks, and people, to this episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My name is Anthony Taylor. I'm the managing partner at SME Strategy. We facilitate strategic planning sessions, and part of the great part of my job is I get to speak to very cool strategy leaders and learn about very cool companies. And our guest today is exactly that. I'm joined today by Grant Morgan. Grant, how's it going today?
Living the dream. Thanks for having me, Anthony.
Awesome, dude. So Grant is the CEO and co-founder at R0. Their company is doing very cool things and they're blowing up. Grant, tell our listeners a little bit about what keeps you busy now and a little bit about your background that got you to where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So R0 is fundamentally a biosafety technology company. So we exist to help our customers create safer indoor spaces for their occupants, guests, employees, and the like, and we and ultimately reduce sick days. So what we're doing is really modernizing this sort of archaic industry, disinfection, that's been dominated by commodity chemical manufacturers for the past 100+ years, and we're doing this with modern technologies like IoT capabilities, like data science and machine learning, specifically modern software experiences. And we're bringing what we know from tech and marrying it with the best in breed hospital grade disinfection technologies. And so what we've created is really this continuous autonomous disinfection ecosystem. And so what I mean by that is we have products that are installed all over a given space, and those products are collecting information about how that space is being used. Then we are identifying and sort of calculating, quantifying the risk of infection based on how people are interacting within this space, where the traffic's flowing, what's happening within the building. And then in real time, we're automating the use of our products to combat that risk and ultimately keep people safe. So, it's been a pretty wild journey from the beginning of the pandemic to here, but I think we've seen the world has changed in a number of ways, and there's a huge appetite for sort of a new standard for keeping people safe in indoor spaces, and we're here to fill that void. So,
cool. And that's on the product side. On the company and leadership side, your company has grown very rapidly, right?
Yeah, it's been it's surreal. And within the last month or two, I've had this sort of like, it's a little bit disconcerting experience where I don't know everybody in the company anymore. But yeah, we started with 3 founders in April of 2020, and today at the beginning of November in 2021, about 19 months later, we are now at 102 employees and we'll be 135 by the end of the year.
That's amazing. Well, it really just shows, a great product with a great system and a great structure can really do wonders. Like, there are definitely needs, and you guys met that. Did you think that was going to be your trajectory when you got your engineering degree and you're saying, oh, here's where I'm going to be 10, 11 years later or whatever?
No, I had no clue. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I think this is an interesting, like R0 is an interesting sort of amalgamation of my past experiences. But, truth be told, when I applied for college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And where I went to school, Cal Poly, you had to declare your major when you apply. And I was like, well, I like math and or I like Legos and I'm good at math. So like mechanical engineering sounds great. And really fell in love with it when I dug in at school and loved. I think I made the right choice. But what ended up happening was, I could have gone into the auto industry or oil and energy, and but I decided that I wanted to spend my time and energy working on something that at the end of the day benefited people, humans in some way, shape, or form. And so I went into the medical device and pharmaceutical industry. So I did product development for a large company called Abbott for a couple of years. Left there, went to a smaller medical device startup. Ran product development for our neurovascular value stream. So we were a contract manufacturer for Stryker, J&J, Medtronic, all the big dogs, and we would basically take a napkin sketch and turn it into something real, get them through sort of FDA trials, and then transfer the manufacturing to steady state. And then I left that industry, the healthcare industry, went to tech and started my first company. And that's where I had zero experience with software product development, but I fell in love with it very quickly. Like it was pretty profound to me that you could kind of mash your fleshy fingers on a keyboard, push some code, and like fundamentally change how people interact with the world. So at my first company, I led the product and engineering teams, grew that company until we got acquired by Allstate. And so that was that really lit my entrepreneurial fire. But at that first company, we did on-demand technical services. So we had a network of 20,000 plus independently contracted technicians all over North America and Europe. And when you would break your phone or need your smart home IoT system installed or smart lock put on your door or whatever, you'd press a button, we'd send someone out to you, and they'd perform that technical service on demand. And so that's where I got exposure to IoT. That's where I got exposure to software, and left after we got acquired by Allstate, started another company. Fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic, we were kind of watching the world fall apart, and my co-founders and I got together and figured we wanted to do something to help. But this is what we're doing at R0 has elements. It has the altruistic aspect from the healthcare experience, which is really, really awesome. And human health is at the core of what we do. So get to flex that experience a little bit. Fundamentally, all of our products are IoT enabled. They collect and generate data. We process that data with some sophisticated data science, and we build software as well. So it's this sort of full circle experience for me that leverages a lot of things that I've done in a quote unquote past life. So, but it's just been this alignment of stars, so to speak, since we started R0, and I feel incredibly grateful and lucky to have the opportunity to do this. But it's exceeded my wildest expectations.
That's awesome. Well, let's keep it going, because I think that there's a cool market. But that was my reflection as well. It's one of those things, as I interview a lot of senior leaders and successful people, is like their journey is the culmination of all of their experiences, and it is not like 1+1. It is like the whole is greater than the parts. Yeah, there we go. And so what I think is really cool is how you've taken all of those independent components, you've mashed your fleshy fingers on a keyboard, taken the really cool parts of entrepreneurship, which I want to invite our leaders to say, it's like not lost. There's going to be new opportunities. Like if we talk about the metaverse and we talk about NFTs, like there's just new tech. And I'm sure, Grant, you and I could talk about that for a long time, but
don't get me going on crypto.
I'm gonna stop you there. But I think that it's beholden for leaders to look at where the world is. And as you do your kind of external analysis, hey, like what are new opportunities for us? You happen to be in a great position where you're like, hey, I can like hack this up and we're going to see if it works because I've got a purpose. Was probably started as fun and important and then turned successful. Fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you nailed it. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit and kind of corroborate what you're saying. But, at the beginning of the pandemic, all three of us co-founders were doing something different. Ben Boyer, one of my co-founders, has been a venture capitalist for 25 years, started a venture capital firm that he's been running for that whole time, left to come operate with us here because what we're doing is that important. My other co-founder, Eli, is a serial entrepreneur. Started a couple companies and he stopped what he was doing to come join. But what was interesting is like we realized that there are moments in time, there are moments throughout history where like the world changes forever. And in that moment, in call it March, when we started ideating on this, we realized that this pandemic was one of those moments. And so we started thinking about like, how will the world change? And you can draw a lot of parallels to historical events and start to derive, do some pattern matching and start to derive your hypothesis on how that world's going to change. But we started looking at things like the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And, out of that came essentially modern hand hygiene. And there was that societal change and that habit that we adopted. And then you fast forward to like 9/11, which is, not a pandemic, but terribly tragic event, changed everything for Homeland Security. So after 9/11, we basically stood up the entire Homeland Security apparatus. So hired 14,000 TSA agents, put air marshals on flights. You still can't take a water bottle or wear your shoes through security. And then there was a whole private sector that popped up to support that apparatus. So think about like the Palantirs of the world. And so we started to think that, look, like the world is going to change, but there will be massive societal and infrastructural changes coming out of this pandemic, and started to think about what those were, and hypothesized that they would be around two things, really: trust and safety. So the safety piece is a little bit more obvious. How do we physically create safer spaces for people to be in? And then the trust piece is a little bit less obvious, but it's born out of the idea that there will be sort of lingering psychological scar tissue in the eyes and the minds of the public. And people aren't just going to want to go back to where all the spaces where we spend most of our time. People are going to want to know that something differentiated is being done, and that there's a new standard to keep them safe in those indoor spaces. And so, with that sort of idea, that hypothesis, we were kind of off to the races. And as we dug in, we realized like how much opportunity there really was. One of the big realizations we had, and actually the original idea for R0 was not what we are today. It was actually my first company, iCracked. It was iCracked for disinfection. So we were going to go spin up a network of independent contractors, equip them with some sort of technology, deploy them to provide some sort of service that's above and beyond what a normal janitorial or custodial staff would do. And so, we discovered UVC, and we were like, this is it. Like, this is the gold standard in hospitals. There's a mountain of scientific evidence proving its efficacy. It's over 100 years old. It's tried and true, and let's democratize access to this gold standard in hospitals, this best in class disinfection technology. So we went to go buy a bunch of these UVC devices that are sold into hospitals, and found out that they're like $125,000. And so we thought the idea was dead in the water. And I ended up that weekend like falling down the rabbit hole, looking at this thing and saying, like, that's a light bulb on wheels with a timer. There's no way it costs 125 grand to make. And so kind of reverse engineered it, back of the envelope, figured out like, hey, we can actually make this for a lot less and offer it at a price that's fair, reasonable, and accessible to organizations of all shapes and sizes, from large enterprises and corporations to schools to hotels, restaurants, and the like. And so that's how we got started.
So I really want to, what I'm super interested in, and listener, as you think about this, beyond the success story, because there will be, it's kind of hard to replicate unless that magic in a bottle. But I want to highlight from Grant is like his engineer mindset. Dare I call it an engineer mindset that was reverse engineering, so to speak, the problem. Like, here's the environment, here's the context, here's the issue, here's the space. I heard a shift from, hey, let's like disrupt the janitorial space and take what I already know, versus, hey, like there's like a chemical hospital machinery type thing, and saying, hey, what are the drivers of this problem, or what will be the drivers of this problem? So the trust component, the safety component, which goes beyond kind of like the dollars and cents piece. It's the consumer mindset around it. Also looking at like, what is the current state of the market, and saying, hey, there's this machine that has probably been in place at the time, was like best in class because you couldn't get something better 20 years ago. Now, you can pretty much get anything to do anything at any time. You just need to be able to code it. So the fact that you had skills was great. And then looking at saying, hey, what is action happened, scope of new environment, action happened, scope of new environment, action happened. So then you guys were smart enough and aware enough to take a step back strategically. So here's my challenge to you as the listener is, as you go through your strategic planning process, don't just think linearly as to like your tasks. What do I need to do within my four walls? What, Grant, I think you and your team did really well, and you happen to be very well positioned because you had kind of a timeout, is saying, hey, like, let's look at the entire map of where we're playing and where are the greatest opportunities, because we're looking outside of our brains. Is that, kind of how you guys did it?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think, to kind of summarize that, you start with the need. And like you have to be solving a problem that people are willing to pay to have solved. And as we were thinking first principles, it's like human health is universal, and that's also the blessing and the curse of this business, is that it's perfectly horizontal. So it presents its own challenges. But yeah, you start with the problem, you figure out like, okay, well, human health is universal. And as we dug into, we learned more and more and realized more and more, but we had a couple of light bulb moments that really like validated that we were, there was opportunity here and that we were onto something. But one of them was, I'm sure you experienced the same thing, but at the beginning of the pandemic, like, we were wiping down all of our groceries with, Clorox wipes and stuff. And like, I'd get home from the grocery store and like I had, take my hazmat suit off, leave it in the garage and scrub down and stuff. And I had this realization that like, look, we're still using chemicals. And these are the same chemicals that we used to fight the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And so the point being like this space is completely void of like technology and innovation. Like there's got to be a better way than chemicals. Another realization that we had along the way that is really the foundation of what we're doing is that people, like humans are an indoor species. Like we spend 90+% of our lives indoors, and the implications of that are that the indoor spaces where we do spend our time have a massive impact on our overall health. And I would even argue that your facilities manager, the person who's making decisions about the infrastructure of the buildings where you work, play, learn, live, that person has a greater impact on your overall health than your doctor does. And so I think COVID catalyzed this paradigm shift in society where we are now aware for the first time ever of that relationship between indoor spaces and human health. We haven't been able to go out in public and into these shared spaces for nearly 2 years. And so people have made that association in a way that they've never made it before. Another realization we had, kind of the third one, was like, we've done a terrible job at keeping ourselves safe in our natural habitat as humans, indoor spaces. And started looking at thinking, what does this business look like after COVID? We looked at before COVID. And before COVID, 40 million Americans got the flu every year. And somehow we've just accepted that that's normal. And you dig into the stats, and like MRSA or staph infections kill more people annually than AIDS, Parkinson's, emphysema, and murder combined. Sick days cost the US economy over $600 billion a year. So there's this massive economic incentive to keep people healthy on top of the fundamental sort of like human health benefits of what we're doing as well. And so all of those things combined, like looking at like this market is ripe for disruption. Disinfection is one of the last, I think, large industries that hasn't seen the sophistication and technology that it's measured and managed with, like other industries, like auto industry, what Tesla did to the auto industry, what SpaceX has done to aerospace, and the like. And so, point being, the opportunity was there, and then started thinking about like the economic drivers, economic incentives behind the solutions that we would bring to the table, and would people be willing to pay for this? And I think the unequivocal answer is like yes. Even if there was just a human health benefit, I think people would absolutely be willing to pay for it. But when there's the economic benefit of reducing sick days, improving the productivity of any business's most valuable asset, it's the people. And so I think we realized we were onto something. And operated, with the urgency like there were lives at stake, because there literally are. And so, we're off to the races, and all of those things have come true in spades. And we are coming out of COVID, thankfully, like starting to get our arms wrapped around it to a larger extent than especially a year ago. This thing's going to become endemic. We're going to live with it forever. And but COVID aside. This is an opportunity for us as a society to come out of this better, stronger, healthier than ever before. And I think if you look at it from a macro level too, we've lost over 5 million lives now due to the coronavirus pandemic, and like shame on us if we let them die in vain. If we go back to normal, like we haven't learned anything. And so this is an opportunity to make a step change, like a monumental improvement in how we keep people safe in indoor spaces, and benefit humans all over the planet, make us all healthier, more productive, and happier ultimately.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. It's Anthony here again. I just wanted to let you know if you're enjoying today's episode, I'd love it if you could give us a review and a comment to let us know where you're listening from. It means a lot to us. It helps us with the algorithm. It also helps us get into the hands of more people so that we can keep bringing great guests onto the show. So please do that. Also, if you or your team are planning a strategic planning offsite coming up, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to see if we're a fit to facilitate, to support you and your team getting on the same page and getting clear about where you want to go. So you can visit SMEstrategy.net or click the link in the description. We'd appreciate both of those things. And now get us back to the episode. Yeah, I get that. Well, one of the things that I had a question about earlier when we were talking about like the amalgamation of all this tech was like the process of introducing new tech. But because sometimes it's hard to introduce a new technology because people are resistant to change. And I think one of the things that, through our conversation is, yes, it was new tech. Yes, it was, there was a cost savings, but you and I know that cost savings aren't only the thing, but the timing happened to be right. That the problem was big enough that people were, I would imagine or assert that people were willing to throw money at kind of any solution that was going to be an improvement. And in your case, there's a very both short and immediate term benefit, but also a long-term benefit. And like the story is clear. So it's not just like an incremental, hey, this is a slight benefit and it's worth, you're going to save a bit of money. This is a huge, huge transformational change that for those that actually recognize the pain / pleasure benefit that they could get, it was clear. And I would also assert that that's probably why your company has grown so quickly, is because there's it's a great business at a great time, and it's got great tech and it's got all the stuff. So my question to you now is, given everything that you got to where you are now, given where you're looking in the future, how are you structuring your kind of value stream for the company? Because the value stream at 3 people is way different than the value stream at 100 people, without giving away any secret sauce. Is like, how do you approach developing value streams for organizations now as we move from pandemic to endemic, and building that up so it's sustainable? I guess that's the question.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think you're absolutely right. We had the tailwinds of the pandemic when we launched. But as I mentioned a minute ago, the opportunity is so much more larger, so much more large than.
I got you on that one.
Words are hard. I'm a numbers guy, but the opportunity is so much bigger than COVID alone, and so as we think about structuring value streams, you have to think about you first pick the North Star, right? And our North Star is reducing sick days. And if we can walk into a business, like, it's very easy. If we can prove that we can reduce sick days, it's very easy for us to, for any business to wrap their head around, like, what's the ROI on this? Like, it becomes a no-brainer. Now there's as we think about, like, how do we, everything we do is geared towards, like, is this going to help us reduce sick days more or not? And so when we think about our value streams and our product roadmap, and which largely drives our value stream, products and services largely, but we think about it in the sense of, like, okay, well, like, first principles thinking, how is disease spread? And we know how disease is spread. It's physics and epidemiology. There are fields of study around this. And diseases are spread, pathogens are spread through 3 vectors of transmission. There's air, surfaces, and person to person. So everything that we're doing from a product perspective, all of our hardware products are combating risk or reducing risk across one or more of those different vectors of transmission. So we think about aerosol transmission, surface transmission, and then you start to pick out, like, the largest pieces of the pie. So what is the most common illness, or what's causing the most pain to customers? And yesterday it was COVID. Tomorrow it'll be COVID for a while, but I think that the independent of COVID, you think about, like, the seasonal flu and common cold. Those are the 2 biggest issues. Those are both transmitted. They're respiratory issues, and they're transmitted through the air. And so there's more value that we can unlock by combating the transmission of those two things, and therefore we should probably orient around air disinfection solutions. And so I think that you can go down the list and start to think about how to extrapolate that, but that's kind of how we think about it. But it's also important to think about sort of the business model, and and this goes back to kind of what you called out earlier, but you start with the end state and the goal. Start with the outcome you want, and you back out of that and figure out how do we actually get there. And so we have our goal is we want to build a recurring revenue business, and so that informs the business model. And so we have a hardware as a service business model where we sell the hardware for a very small dollar amount relative to other things on the market that are similar. And then we actually charge a monthly subscription for sort of like infection prevention as a service. And so it's a very different business if we have recurring revenue as opposed to if we have sort of a transactional business where it's one and done. That also informs how you build the company. So customer success is a massive part of what we do, and making sure that when we sell something to a customer, that's not the end of our relationship with them. That's actually the beginning. And we've invested heavily in building relationships with existing customers and doing things even outside of like what we actually do or sell as a business. So we want to be partners where if a school has a coronavirus outbreak, for example, they can call us up and we can bring our chief scientist, who's the head of OSHA for over a decade, has taught at Harvard and Oxford and stuff. And we can get them on a call for 30 minutes and say, hey, here's what I'd recommend you do. That's not what we're selling, but that adds value to that relationship, and that customer is more likely to extend their relationship with us when the time's right. And so point being, like, you start with the outcome, figure out how you get there, and what do you want to look like as a business long term, and then back out of that, and then you can start to, that informs how you structure the organization as well. But a little bit of everything is involved with that.
No, I love that. Well, I think what I'm really taking away from our conversation is it's no different than every other business. It's just the fact that you've had to go through it so fast. And what's cool about it, and what I kind of reflect on and I think about, is that because your team has gone from 0 to 100 very, very fast, both literally and figuratively, the point of your spear, so to speak, is very sharp. Whereas I see other organizations over time, it's kind of been dulled, as in, who is our target customer? Are we 100% sure? What is the problem that we're solving? Are we 100% sure? What is our model? Are we 100% sure? Is it structured for where we want to go? And what's cool is you've been able to rapid prototype, put all that stuff together in such a cohesive way. I think that's the thing that stands out, is your business model, your value proposition, how you deliver it, and how you're structured to do that is so cohesive because it's just been built that way intentionally. Whereas other organizations, legacy organizations, those big ones, the ones especially that are disrupted, have lost that design. The design doesn't support their objectives, or their objectives aren't as clear. And it's allowing fast movers like you, or you as the listener, to be able to build something to kind of supplant or be able to get a piece of that market.
You nailed it. And I think one of the things that's been really important for any modicum of success that we've been able to achieve is you have to accept that we don't know everything, and you have to be willing to be wrong and expect to be wrong. But the implications of that are that what's most important is finding out when you're wrong and finding out fast. And then the most important thing, and this is what I tell the company, it's it's not important that you failed. What's important is how you respond and how you react. And so if you can figure out that you made a mistake very quickly, really kind of diagnose the root cause. What did we learn? And then pick yourself back up, try something new based on what your new understanding and new learning. But we practice sort of a very experimental approach to building and growing this business. And there's a book that I would highly recommend for really anyone. I'm gonna let my cat in. I'm sorry for my cat.
There you go.
There's a book that I would highly recommend to all your listeners and to you, really anyone who's trying to build a business. But it's called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Yeah, and there's a excerpt, a chapter, or whatever. It's called Bullets Then Cannonballs. And so the idea is, I actually have this like baked into onboarding, basically. Like I send it out to everybody, but want to really bake this into our culture. But the idea is like a bullet is basically a test, an experiment, but it's low cost, low distraction. It has a measurable goal and outcome. And point being, you put a minimal amount of resources behind testing an idea, and you once you test it, then you realize, yeah, this actually works. Then you put more resources behind it, fire a cannonball, essentially. And so bullets, you can fire a couple bullets very quickly and learn a ton, and then double down on what's working and kill what's not. And so any part of the organization can practice this and should practice this. It's from product development, iterating through what should our features and functionality be, what should the products be that we're bringing to market. Finance and accounting can do it too, with testing a new process or the like. Our sales motion is very, very experimental, where we have this feedback loop built in. Like, what are we hearing from customers? What do they want? What do they need? What message is resonating? What's not? And we're constantly iterating on our sales collateral and things like that. And so, point being, like we are very, very experimental, and it's we have that to thank for a lot of the really important pillars of this business strategically moving forward. And one example of that is, like, we actually had no idea that schools would be good targets. And at the beginning, you asked the question, who is our target customer and how do we know? Like, you're just guessing until someone pays for what you're selling. And so at the beginning, we intentionally cast a really wide net. And we had a couple of hypotheses. We were thinking, like, well, restaurants will love this because it'll get people back in the doors. We think, we got an intro to a school. They have to reopen. There's urgency. The kids are very vulnerable. They're sitting in a classroom all day together. So the risk is really high. So let's try that too. Let's try all these different markets. And we learned so much from doing that. And we got the most heat from schools early on. So we doubled down on that. And then, as the market is changing over time, one of the things we learned was, like, restaurants were terrible customers because they were all closed. And they didn't have any cash. They had this existential crisis, essentially, and it breaks my heart to even say that. But so we stopped targeting restaurants at the beginning. Now they're picking back up, but right now all the enterprises are going through their sort of return to work plans. And so, we 6 months ago, the conversation with the large, Fortune 500 enterprise is a very different conversation than the ones we're having today. And so, you have to keep experimenting, keep iterating, but always be building that core of things that work. And then don't be afraid to change things. I think, I very much subscribe to the idea of, like, reversible decision making, or understanding if a decision is reversible or irreversible. I think Jeff Bezos wrote about this in his
the level 1 or level 2 decision, or I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, what are the consequences of making this decision? Is this something where, we're going to go hire a team of 10 people and therefore it's somewhat irreversible? Like this, you're not going to go hire 10 people, say, oh, never mind, and then move on. But, or is it like, hey, we're going to try an email campaign to 100 people. Like, that's a reversible decision. Like, if that doesn't work, it's like, all right, well, on to the next one. No big deal. And so the rigor and the effort with which you evaluate ideas, plan before you act, it should be consummate with the level of sort of reversibility of that decision. And so, if it's low consequence, don't spend a ton of time wasting cycles, spinning cycles, and ruminating over it for too long. Just do it and see what happens. If it's a big, massive structural change, yeah, it probably deserves more time, thought, planning, and effort. So yeah.
Cool. I love that. I mean, I think that's one of the really cool things. I believe organizations should be more entrepreneurial because it helps you be more proactive and reactive to changes as you need to make them. And then one of the other things I think is really important is the culture of like investing in that culture of making sure people know they can make mistakes, but it's not a mistake for mistake's sake, as long as you learn from it. So Grant, in 1 minute or less, what is your number one like leadership kind of thing that you're like, oh man, like leadership lesson as you've grown from 3 to 110, and where can people get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So I'll try to be 1 minute, but biggest leadership lesson, empower your people. Um, uh, Push the decision making down into the organization as close to the work that's getting done as possible. And in order to do that, you have to increase context. And if you increase the context, you can increase autonomy. And that's how you move fast. When you don't have all these different layers and meetings to make a decision, when you have smart people that make good decisions and have good judgment, and they have the context necessary to know what is our company doing right now, how does my job relate to that company, and what's the role that I play in helping the company achieve their goals, and then trust those people to make the decisions. And when they do make the decisions and they're wrong, because they inevitably will be at some point in time, ask what we learned and figure out how to correct course quickly. But fundamentally, it's I had a really hard time early in my career as I was transitioning to a manager, like relinquishing control of the how, especially. But focusing on outcomes, providing the context, and hiring the right people and trusting them was how I got leverage as a manager, and how our business largely has been able to scale so quickly is we do have a very autonomous culture where we do trust our people. But where to find me? Find me on LinkedIn, Grant Morgan. Drop us a note at r0.com. That's rzero.com. And we'd love to chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Grant. It's been a pleasure. We'll save crypto and NFTs for the next time we chat, but really looking
6 hours.
There we go. Well, I look forward to seeing more about what R0 has in the future, both, from a leadership perspective, from your perspective, but also what it does to the market and the spaces that we operate in. So Grant, thanks so much for joining me today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Folks, my guest today, Grant Morgan, who's the CEO and co-founder at R0. Very cool learnings today in terms of how to structure your organization, how to capitalize on an opportunity, and how to really understand the environment around you to help you and your team be successful. So if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate it 5 stars or whatever you think the rating should be. And then if you want to hear more podcasts like this, be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Anthony Taylor. This has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.